Good morning. My name is Margaret, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah, all the way in the back? Sometimes I get really loud, so you probably will. I'd like to thank the Salt City Midwinter Roundup for inviting me to come and share, and it's been wonderful. From the moment they picked me up at the airport, it's just been such a treat to be here, and everybody's been so gracious and hospitable and so friendly, and I've done nothing but eat since I've gotten here. It's just, everybody kept taking me to lunch and, just sign for it, and I've just been eating and eating. I need to go home and lose weight now, But everybody's just been wonderful, and it's such a joy to be here, and I'm very, very nervous, and I don't know why, but I am. So there, now I said it, and hopefully I'll be done with it. But I'm really grateful to be here. And all weekend, I kept getting introduced to people, and they kept going, "This is Margaret. She's our spiritual speaker." And people go, "Oh, you're the spiritual speaker." And I started thinking, oh, my God, I hope they're not expecting somebody mature, It's not going to happen, guys. I don't know. I'm in a really playful mood today, so... which is really helpful, because when I get really nervous, it really helps to be playful. One of the gifts of sobriety is learning not to take myself too seriously, because I can get so damn serious, and life is just so intense, and nobody's going to make it out of here alive anyway, So this is it. This is the deal, and I am an addict, I am an alcoholic, and I am also an adult that grew up as a molested child. And I talk about that not because it has to do with my disease of alcoholism, but it has everything to do with how I felt about myself when I was growing up. Because I grew up feeling dirty and ashamed and confused and guilty, and I was angry. And I didn't understand the things that were happening to me. And I grew up in a family system that was very religious. And the religious system that my family believed in is if you are good, God will love you and grace you and wonderful things will happen. And if you are bad, then God will punish you. And see, I grew up feeling like there must be something very, very wrong with me because these things were happening to me, and I believed it was because God didn't love me. I picked up my first drink of alcohol when I was 11 years old, and it was like magic. From my very first drink, Keith Drum talks about it. He doesn't know if he was born an alcoholic, but from his first drink, an alcoholic was born. And that's what it was like for me. From my very first drink, all of a sudden, I was funny enough, and I was pretty enough, and I was smart enough, and I could do all of the things that I only wanted to do in my mind. And all of a sudden, that big hole that was inside me was filled up, and I wasn't so afraid. I was everything that I wanted to be once I took a drink. I could become anybody. I started doing drugs when I was 13. It's just a part of my story. They were easier to get. My family didn't drink, and I can see the alcoholic behavior, and I believe that I was set up for it. Before I ever picked up my first drink, I was ready, and I was just waiting, and alcohol became my solution. I kept thinking that tomorrow it was going to be different. Tomorrow it'll be okay. If I just have the right car, the right clothes, the right job, if I live in the right city or the right house, or if Mr. Wonderful would just walk through that door, that I would be okay. And what happened for me is I kept looking outside of myself to fix the feelings that were going on inside of me. I kept being attracted to men that were very abusive. I'm one of those people who I got beat up all the time, and I got sexually abused, I got beat up, and I felt like I deserved it. I didn't know that I was a child of God and that I deserved to be loved. I had people telling me that I was stupid and that I was bad, and I believed them. And a lot of people ask, why do women stay with men who beat them up? And the only thing that I can tell you is that being beat up was better than being alone. Because I didn't know how to live inside my skin by myself. I heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. I got arrested twice within 8 months of each other for drunk driving, and they sent me to drunk driving school. And I was very mad, very, very mad about that. I had to go once a week for 52 weeks, and it just pissed me off, and I thought the state of California was just out to get me, like I'm so important, right? And the thing that happened when I was going to that class is that the facilitator of that class during that year celebrated 10 years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have to tell you, I was not impressed at all. I could not figure out why anybody would want to stay sober for 10 years. It was just beyond my comprehension level, But what happened is there was a seed that got planted, and he said things like, social drinkers don't end up in drunk driving school. He said, if you're in here, it's because you've got a problem. And I did go to 3 AA meetings, and I got sober in San Jose, California, and they have some very large meetings, and I sat way in the back, and I didn't hear anything. I was so nervous. I just sat there. I never introduced myself to anybody. I didn't talk to anybody. But the one thing that I do remember is that one of the meetings that I went to, and we all stood up and held hands to say the Lord's Prayer, something happened physically to me. I felt something go through my body, and I cannot describe to you what it was, and I have not felt it again since. But it did happen that one time, and I was a cocktail waitress for a long time, and that was a perfect place for me to be. That was like my reality. When I was at work, it was like my reality, and when I was not working, I didn't know what to do with me. I would lock myself in my house, and I had no phone, and I would close the drapes, and I would sit and I would drink all weekend, and I would polish my fingernails. That's what I did. Would watch old movies on TV, smoke cigarettes, and polish my nails. And because I didn't know how to do anything. I could work, and when I was in the bar, I could perform, and I was on, and I knew how to do that. And anyway, I got arrested and had to go to drunk driving school, and I thought, okay, well, it's the bars. It's working in the bars. I know that's the problem. If I get out of the bars, I'll be okay. And I started apprenticing to be a cosmetologist. And I was going to, I did an apprenticeship, so I was working there, and I was in a relationship. I had actually quit drinking for 8 months and just went crazy inside, and some guy, I wanted to go for a ride on this motorcycle with this guy, and the guy drank. And see, I never heard you don't drink no matter what. And when he drank, I drank, and I was off and running again for a few more years. And I ended up losing 2 houses behind basing cocaine, and I ended up living in a machine shop and having to go over to people's houses to take showers. And I kept thinking, well, I still have a job, so I'm okay. All of my furniture and all of my things had been taken away from me, and I was living in a frickin' machine shop, but I'm okay. I had my pride, I'm okay. I still have a job, and you know what? I got into an accident. I got my things back. I got a house again. I got my furniture back again. I had all of my things. I had the car, the clothes, the job, kind of a Mr. Wonderful who was beating me up on a regular basis, but that was like normal. So, I had all of those things, and what happened is I was dying inside. I was just dying. And I was doing nails in this salon, and this woman used to come in, and I used to do Juliet's on her, and it takes about an hour to do this process, and she would come in there, and she had these bright, clear eyes, and she had a smile on her face, and she had the ability to laugh. And she had this key ring on her purse, and she had these little chips on it. And I thought the woman was a gambler, you know. God, she really loves her chips, doesn't she, you know? And that woman 12-stepped me. I didn't even know what was happening, you know. And she was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she used to sit in there and she used to tell me, Margaret, you don't have to live the way you're living, and you don't have to die the way you're dying. Because we know when we see somebody else who's in the midst of their disease, we know that there's a solution. And what she did is she started talking to me about Alcoholics Anonymous. I spent my last drunk weekend with that woman, and some things came down with her daughter, and I bought her daughter booze, and her daughter ended up in juvenile hall, and it was another garden variety day for me. The insanity that I lived with was just, that was it. That was my life. It wasn't insane. It was my life. And we all know what that's about. And I woke up on a Tuesday morning dying inside. And I said, I'm not going to drink and I'm not going to take anything today. And it was my normal pattern at that time. By the time I would get off work, I would go by the liquor store and I would pick up a jug of wine. And I would go home and I would drink as much as I could, as fast as I could, because all I wanted to do was pass out. I wanted the oblivion. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to feel. I didn't want to deal with anything. I just wanted oblivion. I thought it was enough that I kept a job, you know. I deserved to go home and pass out. And I woke up on a Tuesday morning and I was dying. I said, I'm not going to drink and I'm not going to take anything today. And I went through the whole day and I didn't pick up a drink. And I got home at like 5 o'clock and I paced my living room floor like some caged animal. And I had remembered about the AA meetings that I had gone to a couple of years before. And I knew they had a meeting that started at 8 o'clock and it was only 5 and I was going nuts. And I thought, I can't stay in this house. I don't care. I don't care if I have to go sit on the steps of that church for an hour. I got to get out of here. And I went and I got to the meeting. It was about an hour early before the meeting started. And there were people there. I had no idea. People got there early and made coffee and socialized and had fun. And, you know, and I walked in there and there was a few people in there and I was scared to death. And this woman walked up to me and she stuck out her hand and she said, hi, my name is Maggie. And I said, my name is Margaret. And I started to cry. And I just cried and I cried and I figured, you know what, I was at that point in my life where I was afraid to live and I was afraid to die. And I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I knew that I needed answers, but I had no clue as to what the questions were anymore. And I figured that whoever was in the front of that room had the answers and I wanted them. And this time I sat right up in front. And I focused all of my attention on whoever it was that was speaking. And in San Jose, you stand up in front of everybody when you read and stuff, not just at conventions, but in every meeting. You stand up in front of in a podium, and I focused all of my attention on whoever was there, whether they were reading how it works or the traditions, the secretary, the chairperson, the person who was sharing, or just other people. And it really, really annoyed me. I have to tell you that I was so annoyed that people dared to be laughing and having fun. They were talking during the meeting and whispering and having fun and hugging each other, and I was so angry because didn't you understand? I'm dying. I am dying here. How can you be having fun? I'm dying. I am trying to pay attention, you know, and it wasn't like, oh, look at this is a wonderful place to be. I'm like, shut up! I'm trying to listen! I was very serious when I got here. And I started to hear things. It was amazing. I actually started to hear things, and you told me that I had a disease. I was so glad to hear that I had a disease. You called it alcoholism. It had a name. Yes. I'm an alcoholic. I have alcoholism. Some people are allergic to strawberries. Some people are allergic to chocolate. They break out into rashes. I break out into assholism. That's me. I'm an alcoholic. I'm so glad. See, when you told me that I had a disease and it was a physical allergy coupled with an obsession of the mind, and it's the phenomenon of craving, And once I started, I couldn't stop, and I knew that. I knew that. That made sense to me, but it let me off the hook. Because what it meant was it wasn't my fault that I couldn't stop drinking. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't because I was stupid, or I'd told too many lies, or I'd ripped too many people off, or I'd given too many blowjobs in parking lots. It was because I was an alcoholic. And you said there was a solution. And you told me go to 90 meetings in 90 days and don't drink and don't take anything in between. And I thought, okay, I can do that. So get a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and read it. The program's contained within the first 164 pages of the book. And I thought, okay, I can do that. You said get a sponsor, because when you get sober, feelings are going to come up and you're going to need somebody to talk to. And I thought, okay, I can do that. You said work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's the key to your sobriety. And I thought, okay, I can do that. I didn't know what that meant, but I thought, okay, I can do it. And then you said the word God. And I thought, oh, I'm in the wrong, I don't do God. I'm in the wrong place. I don't do God. I'm, and what it was is I was scared to death. I was scared to death of God. What I did do is I got a sponsor, and I shared that fear with her. And my first sponsor was a kindergarten teacher, and she gave me what she called Sandbox AA. And she kept it so simple for me, and she would have me come over to her house, and she would be doing her dishes, and she'd be cleaning her hand, and I'd follow her around like this little puppy dog, and what she did is she started talking to me about her God. And my sponsor told me that her God was warm and kind and loving and sharing and caring and giving and had a sense of humor, and he was the creator of all beauty, and he was the spirit of the universe. And I had never heard anybody talk about God like that. And I was in awe of her God. And she said, you can borrow him if you want to. And I had no idea you could do something like that. I didn't know. And I went through my early sobriety, and I'd call her on the phone, and I'd say, well, what do you think your God would think about this? And she'd tell me something, and I had forgotten how to pray by the time I got here. And she gave me a little card that had the Serenity Prayer. And she said, start with this. Just start with the Serenity Prayer, Margaret. Let's keep it simple. And I would say the Serenity Prayer over and over and over again. And then when she started me through the journey of the 12 steps, she took me into the big book, and she showed me where the 3rd step prayer was. And she showed me where the 7th step prayer was. And when she took me into the 12 by 12, she showed me where the 11th step prayer was, and she said, just read these. And what I know is that a little bit of my fear of God started to change. When she started me through the journey of the steps, we went through the 12 by 12, and we went through it paragraph by paragraph. And in the first paragraph of the first step in the 12 by 12, it talks about warping ourselves into such a pattern of destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove it from us. And I didn't know what the word providence meant. And I felt stupid. And my sponsor never shamed me for not knowing something. She never made me feel bad or feel awkward. What she did is she encouraged me to learn. She said, Margaret, if you don't understand a word, please do yourself a favor. Look it up in the dictionary. And she said, Margaret, this is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it needs to make sense to you. And she said, people can give you their opinion, they can give you their experience, but it needs to make sense to you. A lot of people understand algebra and trigonometry and all of those. I don't, but a lot of other people do, but that doesn't mean I get it. And she said, you have to understand it. This is what's going to save your life, Margaret. And I looked up the word providence, and it talked about a supreme being and the act of being provident. And I looked up the word provident, and it said making provisions for your future. So in the first paragraph of the first step in the 12 by 12, my sponsor introduced me to a supreme being who was making provisions for my future. And some of that fear started to leave. I went to a meeting at a Star Lodge hospital, and I was in my first 6 months, and some guy was talking about, watch what you pray for. You just might get it. He said, I prayed for my wife to come back, and all 3 of them did. I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I had no idea. What do you pray for? What do you don't pray for? I didn't know. And my sponsor just kept guiding me back into the book, taking me back into the book. She told me I needed to go to step study meetings, I needed to go to big book meetings, and I needed to get this program. When the guy that I was living with when I got sober didn't get this program, and he used to follow me around to meetings, and he was really angry because I wasn't playing the game anymore. And he would follow me around to meetings, and he would sit behind me, and he would be very disruptive, and he'd call me a bitch and a whore, and he would be disruptive enough until he thought somebody would actually physically remove him from the meeting, and he'd get up yelling and screaming, obscenities and all of this, and I was so scared. I was so scared. And I thought, these people aren't going to let me stay. And I was so afraid that you would make me go away because of this guy. And what he did is, there was a man sitting behind me one day, and after Fred had left, this guy put his hand on my shoulder and he said, it's okay, honey, doesn't matter what you used to be. You're an AA lady now, and you're always welcome here. Yeah, no doubt. My sponsor taught me the principles behind the steps as she was guiding me through them. And the principle behind the first step that she taught me was about honesty. And the truth is, I didn't know how to live without a drink or a drug. I didn't know how to be honest to you because I didn't know how to be honest to me. And when I got here, I thought I was cash register honesty, but it was a lie. My denial system is very, very big. Very powerful, much more powerful than me, but God's bigger than all of it, so it's okay. But I had this denial, and I didn't know how to be honest. I didn't know how to be truthful. I had no idea what I felt or what I thought. I had been a chameleon for so long. Whatever it took to please you or to get what I needed or whatever I would become, I would do. It didn't matter, and I had no clue as to who I was. In the second step, my sponsor taught me about hope. When I had 6 months sober, the guy that I was living with destroyed everything that I owned. He took a knife to all of my clothes, all of my furniture. He spray painted my whole apartment. He destroyed the curtains, the carpet, everything. The only thing that I had left out of all of my things were 2 boxes of paperback books and some bent-up pots and pans. And I didn't get it. I didn't understand why God would want me to lose all of my things. And I learned the most powerful lesson of my sobriety. I learned that I didn't have to pick up a drink. I learned I didn't have to stick a needle in my arm, and I didn't have to take anything. I learned that I had a room to go to where people cared. And I shared what was going on, and I stood up in front of you people and I said, I'm scared. I am confused. I don't get it. Why would God want this to happen to me? You keep telling me about this loving God. And what I came to understand is that God was so gentle because, you know what, I wasn't inside any of those clothes when that knife was going through them. And I very well could have been. And I learned I can lose everything and not drink. I learned that people in these rooms really care. There was a man who at that time had 9 years, and he opened up his home to me. And he let me move in, and he didn't charge me for rent or a telephone or anything. And not once did he ask me to cook for him, to clean for him, or to sleep with him. And this man was a walking, talking big book. He'd grown up. He'd been a drunk in the alleys in San Francisco, eating out of garbage cans for 3 years. And he got to this program because he was going by an open door and there was a plate of cookies in there. And he went in to steal the cookies. And a guy came out and said, you know what, we're going to have a meeting here in about a half hour and I'll give you that whole plate of cookies if you just stay. And he did. And he was there for me 9 years later when I got to the rooms and I needed it. And he started to teach me about unconditional love. And see, I've always known that you would want something from me. It was just trying to figure out what it was you wanted so that I could give it to you. And he wasn't asking anything of me. And what he used to do is he would always talk to me and he would always take me to the book. He'd always take me to the big book. And when I first got here, I cried all the time. I am one of those criers. And I would cry and I would cry and I would cry. And people would go, it's okay, Margaret. Every time you cry, God's removing something from you that you don't need anymore. And you called it spiritual surgery. And I hated myself so much by the time I got to these rooms. I didn't care what it was that God was taking away from me. I didn't want it. And I would cry and I was having a great day. I had been at work and I was having a great day and I was driving home and a song came on the radio and I started crying and tears were streaming down my face and I got home and Jerry was home and he was in his room and I walked up to his room and I knocked on his bedroom door and he looks at me and he said, Margaret, what's the matter? And I went, nothing. And he said, you're crying. I know. And he gets this big smile on his face. And he looks at me and he goes, do you want to know what's wrong with you? And I said, yes. And he says, you're an alcoholic. And I went, oh, okay. And that's it. And he would take me into the book and he would say, half measures avail us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. He said, Margaret, it's just the process. Just trust the process. Just let it be. Just keep trusting in God and go for it. Just trust in God and go for it. You just don't drink, you don't take anything, and you keep coming back. We love you. That's what I kept hearing at every meeting that I went to, and every time I showed up, that's what they would say. Just don't drink and don't take anything and keep coming back. We love you, honey. When I had almost a year of sobriety, people kept telling me, try new and different things. So I got married. I hadn't done that yet. I really believe that was like the third step. You know, that was the leap of faith that I took. And my sponsor taught me that the principle behind the third step was faith. And life seemed wonderful. I was sober, and here was this guy that I met at a dance with a hot 90 days, you know, and he was like missing a tooth, and we were dancing a slow dance, and he was shaking like a leaf, and I fell in love right there on the dance floor. That was it. Went to Tahoe and eloped. Came back, went to my home group and said, guess what I did this weekend? I went to Tahoe and got married. And they all looked at me and they said, Margaret, don't drink and don't take anything and keep coming back. We love you, honey. That was always what they told me. And about 5 weeks after I got married, I was going crazy. I was going nuts. I was angry all the time. I was kicking my dog and I was throwing my cat against the wall and I was screaming at my husband because nothing he did was right. And I didn't understand. I was not drinking and I wasn't taking anything. I was going to regularly scheduled meetings on a regular basis. I was writing, I was sharing, I was of service, I was working the steps with my sponsor, and I was doing all of the things that you're supposed to do to be happy, joyous, and free. And I wanted to kill. And I didn't understand. I didn't get it. I went to a meeting one day. I sat there and I got called on and I stood up and I said, if this is sobriety, I don't think I want it. I'm doing the deal. I'm doing it. I'm doing everything that you keep telling me to do to have this freedom and this love and this joy in my life. And I hate you. That was the day that I started to believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Coincidence. Because my sponsor was at that meeting, and she grabbed me after the meeting. She took me outside very quickly. Come with me, young lady. She took me out there, and she said, Margaret, I want you to go home, and I just want you to write. See, she had taught me about the fourth step and the courage of the fourth step, and she said that in the fourth step, we uncover, we discover, and we discard. And she said drinking is just a symptom of what the real problems are, and if you don't deal with the real problems, you won't stay sober. She said if you manage not to pick up a drink, you're not going to have any serenity in your sobriety if you do not apply these steps in your life. And she taught me about courage, and I had been doing 4 steps. On my marriage, on my husband, on my dog, it didn't matter. I knew that the solution was in the steps, and I was working them, and I was still wanting to kill. And what I did do is I went home and I wrote. And I came back to my sponsor and I read it to her. And what came up for me was all of the hatred, all of the anger, and all of the rage from growing up as a molested child. And my sponsor taught me that I take these 12 steps as a foundation and do life. I don't live in these rooms. I live on Reality Boulevard. That's where I need to have this program. I can sit in these rooms really easy for an hour and a half or so and be very spiritual, or not. But when I really need this program is out there. And she said that what I needed to do was to take these 12 steps as a foundation and go to where they could help me to recover from being a molested child. She said, Margaret, you will always be an alcoholic, but you can recover from being a molested child. And she talked to me about the healing and the peace that she felt, and I believed her because my sponsor had grown up as a molested child, and she had gone to where she needed to go to deal with it. And that's what I did, and my sponsor took me by the hand, and we went to a program where they deal specifically with being a molested child. And in that program, they taught me about feelings, and they taught me the gift of feelings. They taught me that through fear, I learn wisdom. Through loneliness, I learn to reach out. Through anger, I have strength. Through pain, I have healing. Through shame, I learn about humility. And through guilt, I learn about values. And through joy, there is healing available. They also taught me positive and constructive ways of dealing with my anger. He told me that kicking the dog and throwing the cat against the wall was just not appropriate for a sober woman. So what they taught me to do was they taught me to beat up pillows with tennis rackets. And I hated it. I felt stupid. Has anybody ever done that? You feel stupid beating up a pillow with a tennis racket. I did. I felt stupid. But my sponsor kept telling me, if you don't get rid of the anger, Margaret, you're never going to recover. If you don't get rid of the anger, you won't have any serenity. And I saw people who had 6, 7, 8, 10 years going back out. They were either drinking or they were blowing their brains out. And I said, is that what I have to look forward to? It scared me. And she said, Margaret, you don't ever have to worry about going back out or blowing your brains out as long as you deal with your issues as they come up. And she said, this is about the courage of the fourth step, and you need to go uncover, discover, and discard. And I was going to therapy, and I'd been going to therapy for over a year. And during this time, I also got divorced because my husband chose to use. And for me, I could not live with somebody who was drinking. I couldn't do it. He was smoking pot, and he was bringing it into the house, and he was lying about it. And I'm just not well enough to live with somebody who's using, or sick enough. I never figured out which it was. I don't know if I wasn't well enough or sick enough to live with that guy, but I needed to get a divorce. And you people taught me that it was okay, that my sobriety must come first. My sobriety has to come before marriages and husbands and jobs and kids or whatever, that my sobriety must be the most important thing in my life. I walked into therapy one day, and I was in a very great mood, and I had this big smile on my face, and I looked at my therapist like, I don't even know why I'm here. And she looked at me and she said, fine, then don't recover. And there was something inside of me that just snapped. She just pissed me off. And all of a sudden, I grabbed one of those pillows and I grabbed that tennis racket and I started beating it and I started beating it. And all of the people that had abused me were inside of that pillow, and I was beating them and beating them and beating them and screaming and yelling. And I finally threw down my tennis racket and I looked at her and I said, I feel like tearing them apart. I feel like ripping their heads off. And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, fine, rip their heads off. And she handed me 3 telephone books. And I was like, oh, yes. And I got those and I started with my uncle, and I went down his eyes and his nose and his mouth, and I went all the way down his body, and I went to the next one and the next one and the next one, and I was tearing them all apart, and I was stuffing them into this trash can with this little trash can liner on it, and I kept putting them in there and putting them in there and putting them in there, and I got all done tearing them all up, and I looked at her and I said, I feel like pouring gasoline on them and lighting them on fire. And she looked at me and she said, fine, grab your bag and a lighter and come with me. And I was like, oh, yes! My wildest dreams were coming true. I was loving it. There was no God in my life. There was no love in my life. There was no AA. There was no 12. There was nothing but that hatred, that rage, and that anger. And see, I'd grown up for years of having visions of taking these people and tying them to chairs and cutting them with knives. And I would immediately feel guilty for thinking that, because I wanted to be a nice girl. And nice girls don't tie people up to chairs and cut them with knives. And this woman was letting me do this, and it was wonderful. And I went outside and I lit them all on fire, and I was watching them, and their skin was peeling away from their bones, and their faces were melting, and I was like, yes, yes, and I was spitting on them, and I was loving it. I loved it. I just loved it. And it was a little bit windy that day, and she got me this little bucket of water, and I had to put the fire out, and then I had to clean up all this newsprint and wet ashes and stuff, and I put them in the Dipsy dumpster. I was spitting on them, and it still didn't feel like enough. But what do you do after you rip them up and set them on fire? I don't know. I couldn't think of anything else, and I went into the bathroom to wash my hands and to get the newsprint off my hands, and I looked in the mirror. And it scared me because I didn't recognize the woman who was looking back at me. And as I started to wash my hands, I started to pray, because what came back into me at that moment was the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps, and particularly steps 6 and 7. See, through the 5th step, when I share the secret with you, I gain integrity. I no longer have to be afraid of you. And I learned about integrity in the 5th step by sharing it. And I learned about the 6th and the 7th step, and the anger was my character defect. And I'd been carrying it around. And the 7th step is just about asking God to remove it. The 5th step is just a clear recognition of who and what I am with a sincere desire to be better. And as I started to wash my hands, I started to pray. And I asked God, please take away that hatred. Please take away that pain. And please take away all of those people, because I don't want to carry them around anymore. And I went back into my therapist's office and I sat down, and she looked at me and she said, how do you feel? So I feel like I have little holes all over inside of me. And each one of those holes represented one of those people I had just torn apart and burned. And what I saw in my mind that was going on in my body was me when I was 5 years old. That's how old I was when the molest began. And what that little girl did is she walked up to each one of those holes and she took out a piece of her heart and she closed it. And it was the first time in my life that I understood that I wasn't bad and I wasn't dirty and it wasn't my fault. And it was the first time that I really truly knew that I was a beautiful, loving child of God and that it was going to be okay. I had to learn how to live one day at a time, step by step. I had no clue who I was without that anger. And my sponsor kept telling me, you just don't drink and you don't take anything and you take one baby step at a time. You just keep showing up. Just keep showing up. In the 8th step, my sponsor taught me about brotherly love. And she taught me that I'm no different than you. That we all come from the same place. And my head will look at you and say, well, you dress differently, or you talk differently, or you look differently, or you drive a different kind of car. My head tells me that you're different, and when I get out of my head and I come down to here, I can speak the language of the heart with you. And when I am in my heart, we are all the same and we are all equal. And she taught me that I can be a woman among women, and I can be a worker among workers, and I can be just another woman in recovery. I'm no better than, I'm no less than anybody else. I got a motorcycle at that time. I got a little Sportster, and I used to ride around San Jose with my little bikerette boots and my little bikerette bandana and my leather fringe jacket, and I thought I was pretty cute. I don't know. But I'd be riding around and I would see old people drive up next to me at a stoplight, and they would look at me and they would I would see fear in their eyes. And I used to think I wanted to wear a big sign that said, but I'm clean and sober and I'm a nice girl, you know? And I started to learn not to judge other people. And in the 9th step, my sponsor taught me about making amends, and she taught me about discipline, and that I have to keep making amends and continue to make amends. And a lot of my amends were financial, and I could only pay a little bit at a time, but to continue to pay and to make those amends. And when I had 3 years of sobriety, I met a guy, and I fell in love. And it was the first time in my life that I got to have a relationship with a man where we didn't yell and scream at each other. We didn't call each other names. We didn't have to attack each other's self-esteem or ego. And I decided that I wanted to go to school because I've always liked to play more than I've liked to work. And so I wanted to go to school for a recreational therapy and developmental disabilities degree. And I started doing that, and the state of California was paying for my books, my supplies, my tuition, my parking, and my gas, and I was in love, and I was going to school. In my first quarter, I took 10 units, and I passed with straight A's. I got my report card in the mail, and it said grade point average 4.0. You're looking at a woman who grew up thinking her IQ was 4.0. You know, this was like an amazing thing to me. My life was wonderful. Women were coming in. I was sponsoring a lot of women, and I was feeling really good, and life seemed to be going wonderful. And then all of a sudden, I got to this point in my life where everything got really, really big. And I went from 10 units to 16 units, and I got real overwhelmed in school, and I was doing hair and nails out of my house, but I wasn't making enough money to pay my bills, and I was getting, 24-hour notices for the electric to be turned off, and I didn't have the money to pay it, and I needed to get a real job, but I didn't have 40 hours a week to give to a real job because I was spending all my time going to school. And then my guy came to me and he said, Margaret, I love you, but I'm going to leave this summer and follow my lifelong dream, and I'm going cross-country with my best friend on my motorcycle. And he said, and I'm not sure I'm coming back. And all of a sudden, life got really, really big, and I got overwhelmed. And for the first time in my sobriety, I lost hope. And I was coming up on 4 years of sobriety, and I sat on a dentist's office, on the stairs at the dentist's office next to my house one night, and I thought about picking up a drink. And I saw this drunk woman walking down the road, and she was slurring her words, and she was hanging on to the guy that she was with, and she was not a pretty picture. And I knew that if I picked up a drink, I was going to look like her. And I didn't want to look like that. And I thought about this program, and I thought about the traditions, and I thought particularly about the 5th tradition, where it talks about our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And my head said, Margaret, you can't help anybody stay sober. You've got nothing to give. And I sat on those steps. And I wanted to die. Because I don't know how to live without a drink or a drug or hope. If I have no hope. This program has taught me that you pick up a phone, not a drink. And I did call my sponsor. And this program has also taught me to be responsible. I figured it was going to take me 3 weeks before I could kill myself. Because I had to make out a will, and I had to take out a life insurance policy, and I had to clean up all the things around my house that I didn't want anybody else to have to deal with, and then I had to figure out how I could kill myself to make it look like it's an accident, because I wanted to make Scott the beneficiary so he would get the money before he went on his trip, so he would have a really good summer. And it took me 3 days to figure out how I could do that, and I put myself right on the cross up there. It was like a really sick 3 days of trying to figure out how to do this. And my sponsor used to tell me, Margaret, get off the cross. We can use the wood. Took me a long time to really understand what she meant by that, but the more I tell my story, the more I understand it now. And the way I was going to kill myself was I was going to go to Stockton to my girlfriend's house. I had a dog, and I needed to take my dog, and I knew that this woman would take care of my dog, and I was going to go late at night and come back, and I was going to drive my car off a cliff. I thought, well, that'll work because it'll look like an accident. Scott will get the money. He'll have a great summer, and everything's fine. Well, on my 4-year birthday that year, it fell on Easter Sunday. And I took my car over to the restaurant where my boyfriend worked, and I dropped it off, and I got on the back of his motorcycle, and we went to, they have a bike blessing every year in San Jose on Easter, and we went to the bike blessing, and I came back to pick up my car, and all 4 of my tires had been slashed. And I thought, God really does have a sense of humor, doesn't he? So I was going to put retreads on this puppy. I'm thinking $5 a pop. This bitch is going off a cliff in a week, and I'm not going to spend money, right? And my boyfriend said, no, you drive too far to school. You have to put new tires on that car. And I'm like arguing. Of course, I couldn't tell him I'm running it off a cliff, because you just don't tell people you're going to do that when you're going to do it. And he didn't understand. So I had to put new tires on. And it was when I started to believe that God will not remove character defects as long as they're going to work for you, because greed kicked in. I thought, I'll be goddamned if I'm going to run this car off a cliff. I just spent $200 on tires. But I have 40,000 miles to go. I better get a job. And what happened is, not once during that time that I wanted to kill myself did I pick up the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not once did I admit that I was powerless over jobs and school and finances and relationships, and that my life was unmanageable. Not once did I get up in the morning and ask God to restore me to sanity. And I was not getting up in the morning and saying the 3rd step prayer and turning my will and my life over to the care of God. The most beautiful, powerful lesson that I learned from that is that I can stay sober with no hope. If I don't pick up a drink, if I don't stick a needle into my arm, and I don't take anything, I can stay sober with no hope. And what I found is I was on my way to school one morning and had my brand new tires on my car. and the radio was playing. And I realized that my fingers were tapping to the music and my foot was tapping, and it was like one of those wonderful, oh yeah, life. It's going to be okay. And I can tell you that a lot of things have happened in my sobriety, but I have never lost hope since that time. My guy did go away that summer. He came back, and the next year he went away again, and he ended up in Portland, Maine, and he called me and said that he was going to stay there for the winter, and did I want to come? And I was 3/4 away from my degree in rec therapy and developmental disabilities, and I said, sure, I'll be right there, you know, and that's typically alcoholic of me. And I ended up in Portland, Maine, and found out that, and you all know this, I'm sure, that if it gets cold enough, the hair in your nose does freeze. That is one of the biggest things I've never forgotten about being in Maine. I couldn't believe it. I took my dog for a walk, and the hair in my nose froze. I walked back into my house. I called California, and I said, my God, the hair in my nose is froze. They said, Margaret, just come home, honey. Just don't drink, don't take anything, keep going to meetings, and get home, okay? And it was incredible. I learned how to shovel snow. It was fun for a minute, yeah, you know. Found out you have different kinds. You have wet snows and dry snows, and you have Hollywood snow that's all sparkly, and you have dirty, yucky, slushy snow, and it's snow. I had no idea there were so many different kinds of snow. What an education. I also found out that there's recovery in Portland, Maine, and they have a wonderful fellowship there, and it was really incredible. And what happened is my guy had ridden his motorcycle to Maine, and we bought another one so that I could ride home and go cross-country with him, and what I saw was this fellowship in action all across the United States, because we'd be on the road, and we'd roll into a little town, and we'd look up at central office and find out where there was a meeting, and we would go to a meeting, and we'd roll in there, and we'd be kind of dirty and bugs in our teeth, you know, and kind of, you know, biker stuff, and it was obvious we were visitors, you know, and people were incredible, and they would invite us to their homes, and they would say, please, come home, share a meal, you know, sleep, take a bath, please, you know. And they were wonderful. These people would just invite us into their homes, and it was incredible. And every day I got to see God working in my life. And I learned the principle behind the 10th step is perseverance, where you continue to look at yourself and you continue to maintain a spiritual contact with God and to check your motives out and things like that. And it's very informative, and it's about persevering and continuing to look at my behavior, but not to stay focused on me. And in the 11th step, I learned about an awareness of God, and my sponsor taught me that I can tap into God's power. And whatever it is I need today to stay sober, God has it. God has the courage. God has the strength. God has the knowledge. God has the wisdom. God has everything that I need if I am willing to tap into that power today. I got back home, and my guy decided that he wanted to move to Phoenix, Arizona, and we were going to go to school. He was going to go to motorcycle mechanics school, and I was going to learn how to run a small business. And the plan was move to Phoenix for a year, go to school, go back to California, and open up a little motorcycle repair shop. And that was the plan. My sponsor taught me that you plan the plans, not the results. And what happened is I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and my life fell apart. I was coming up on 7 years of sobriety, and within an 8-month period of time, my 4-year relationship ended. 4 of my family members died. 4 of my friends died or were killed. 1 of my parents got diagnosed with cancer, and 3 of my cats got killed. And I thought, Phoenix sucks, man. I want to go home. And see, what happened for me is that I got put on a whole new spiritual path. And the God that I had believed in up until that time wasn't enough. I don't know how to say that right. I grew up in Alcoholics Anonymous, believing in a God that did things to me, for me. Everything was an act of God in my life. God would make me sick to slow me down. God would hit me upside the head with a 2x4 to get my attention. But He's a warm and loving, kind God. But I would get hit upside the head with 2x4s. And that's how I viewed God. And I knew that God was wonderful, and I knew that God was working in my life. But I still had this thing about God doing things to me. And what I had to understand is that God doesn't do things to me. I cannot stay sober and believe in a God that would take away my 4-year relationship to see how spiritual I am. And then while He's at it, kill off 4 of my family members. And kill off 4 of my friends. And then give one of my parents cancer, and just for kicks and giggles, kill off 3 of my cats and see if I stay serene. I cannot believe in a God like that. And what I found is that I have a God who puts the people in my life at just exactly the right moment to say exactly the right thing that's going to give me the hope to stay sober for one more day. My whole life fell apart. I was twisted. I didn't know people in Phoenix. I hadn't gotten real involved because I knew I was going to leave. I was sponsoring women, but not as many as I was used to sponsoring. And everything fell apart, and I thought, what is this? No wonder people go back out at 7, 6, 5, 4 years, 10 years. Because that's when things start sober. S-O-B-E-R, son of a bitch, everything's real. It gets real. And this is where it changed for me. There was like a whole new spiritual experience. And I ended up, I got a job. And I worked for a man in the program, and which was very wonderful because I kept telling myself, it can't get any worse than this. It can't get any worse, and somebody else would die, and I would have to leave town, and I would come into work, tears streaming down my face, and my boss would say, who died now, and where do you need to go? And he was actually wonderful because he gave me all the time off that I needed to go and be with all of the people that I needed to be with, and I ended up getting the job working for Coast to Coast Audio Productions, and I started traveling around to different conventions and conferences all over the United States, and I got to listen to the most wonderful, powerful speakers that recovery has to offer. And I met a man in Hilton Head, South Carolina, named Mr. Bill, who's in another fellowship, and I was sharing with him about the pain that I was in the midst of all of what was going on, and that man sent me a book called The Fall of Freddie the Leaf by Leo Biscaglia. And see, the clean and sober adult woman can understand that people go away, and people die, and people get sick, and cats get killed. But that little kid inside of me was just dying, and all she knew is that these people were gone, and it didn't make sense, and it was too much, and I kept saying, it can't get any worse, it can't get any worse. And the next month, somebody else would die, and I'd say, it can't get any worse, it can't get any worse. And somebody else would die, and I'd say, it can't get any worse, I can't get any worse. And I would show up in meetings, and I would have tears streaming down my face saying, I don't know how to do this. See, because I kept thinking that somehow I'm supposed to maintain my dignity and stay graceful, and I didn't want to accept my humanness and my vulnerabilities, and I was embarrassed. I had 7 years of sobriety. I should be doing it better. If I have a good program, for some reason I kept thinking that, like, I shouldn't have been affected or something. I don't know. And I learned about embracing my humanness, and by the eighth death, and I had been saying all along, it can't get any worse, and I realized that life is like an ocean, and it's like waves, and a wave would come and it would knock me down, and I'd stand back up and say, it can't get any worse, and another wave would come and I would get knocked down, and it can't get any worse, and after the last time I said, fuck it, I'm learning how to body surf, Oh, sorry. I've been really good about not saying that word this whole time. I usually say that word a lot more when I'm ripping people up, and I did really good this time. But anyway, so I learned, it's like learning to go with the flow, learning to embrace my humanness, and learning to just be who I am. And I've had so many gifts in recovery, and Father, Son, and Holy coincidence. During that time, I ended up crashing a Christmas party, and there was the man who was having this Christmas party just happened to be a chemical dependency counselor whose specialty was grief recovery. And I ended up in grief recovery therapy. And I can tell you that you can work the 12 steps on grief. It isn't always easy, but what I learned is when I learned to embrace my pain, I can heal from it. You can't heal what you can't feel. I learned that my pain is not who I am. It's a part of me, but it's not who I am. And I learned that I could take my pain and set it down and say, I'm going to a meeting. And you can come or you can stay. But I'm going to a meeting. And sometimes my pain would come and sometimes it would stay. And I learned to explore that pain, and I learned that feelings won't kill me. If I pick up a drink, I'm going to die. Part of what this is all about is I had a lot of experiences with death in my recovery. And one of the greatest gifts that I got was my stepfather was dying of cancer. And my whole family's met. My mother was an RN, my father was a lab technician, my oldest sister's an RN, my brother's an RN, my little sister's an ATM. I have a sister who works for Visa and who makes lots and lots of money, and then there's me. And I just like to play a lot, My stepfather was dying, and I went down to spend some time, and what I got as a gift of this program is I got to sit and tell him how much I loved him and how much he meant to me and what a good father he had been. He married my mom. She had 4 kids, and I was the youngest at 10, and he took us on, and he lived through all the insanity of all of our lives, and especially mine, and I got to tell him what a good provider he was and just how much I loved him, and we knew that he was dying soon, and we didn't expect him to die. When he died, my brother was in Europe, and he had promised my mother that he would wait till my brother got home, and we really sincerely believed that he would be able to do that. And this particular day, my mom decided to go into town to get something because she felt confident that he would wait till Carl got home. And I was hanging out with my stepdad on the bed, and he'd had all kinds of morphine and stuff, and he'd been sitting talking, and I'm watching the movies he likes to watch, and he starts talking about the light, and I freaked. Don't go to the light. Nope. Don't go to the light. I don't even want to hear about the light. Don't talk. Nope. Don't even. And I kind of, snapped too. I was scared. I was very scared. I didn't even want to be there. I wanted to go home. I wanted to drive back 3.5 hours to Phoenix and do my laundry. I'll come back when my laundry's clean. I wanted to go home. I was scared to death. did not want to be there. And he started talking about the light, and it occurred to me that that was awfully selfish and self-centered. And it doesn't matter how long you've been sober. I think some things never change. And I asked him, I said, do you need to go to the light? Do you need to go to the light? And he looked at me and he said, where's your mother? And I said, she went to the store. And I said, I promise. She'll be back really soon. And I believe that at that moment he made a conscious decision not to go to the light. But what happened is it created a tremendous amount of physical pain for him. And he started to scream. And he started to cry. And I started to freak. And I was standing there going, oh my God, what do I do? Oh my God, what do I do? Oh my God. Oh my God. What do I do? And I prayed and I said, God, please help. And I knew he had two different types of pills, and one was a fast-acting pill and one was a slow-acting pill, and I had no clue as to which was which because I didn't have to be a part of his pill-giving process. You know, I didn't have to be a part of it, and I gave him what I thought was the right pill, because then I kept thinking, what if I kill him? You know, I mean, I was scared, and I gave him the pill, and he calmed down, and my mom came home, and the phone rang, and we'd been his skin hurt, and we were just wiping him off, and the phone rang, and my mom went out of the room to answer the phone, and I don't know why she didn't answer the phone that was in the bedroom, but she went out of the room, and as I was wiping him down, he tried to get up, and he was just trying to get up, and I knew he shouldn't be getting up, and I kept trying to just talk him into staying, and just lay down, just please lay down. And when I realized he was talking to somebody, and he was saying, which way do I go? Well, how long is it going to take? And he was trying to get up, and I just wanted him to lay down. And I believe that what happened is that somebody came to help him to make that transition. And he was talking to him and asking him, which way do I go? How long is it going to take? And I believe that once he realized that he could just leave this physical part here, and he could still go with him, he just laid down and he died. And it was the most peaceful, beautiful experience I'd ever witnessed. And I was so grateful to have been able to be there and to be a part of that. And to know that I was with him when that happened. And I had been so afraid and not wanting to be there. And what I know is that the gift of being there, I am not afraid of dying. I work mostly with developmentally delayed adults. But I have a couple of little kids that I work with. I work with Down syndrome kids and mildly mentally retarded kids. And I had this little 8-year-old girl that I worked with, and she was missing part of her brain, and she didn't walk and she didn't talk. And I used to do bathing with her, and she was in the bathtub one day, and I was looking at her, and I was looking into these little eyes, and I was thinking, what quality of life does this child have? What is the point in this? Why is this that we have children like this? And you know, and I question sometimes why I'm in the profession that I'm in, and these kids' lives. And what happened is a few months later, I got a phone call on a Sunday morning saying that Katrina, my little girl, had stopped breathing, and would I please get there right away. It was her parents calling me, and I had to drive across town, and I had no idea what was going on, and I drove as fast as I could, and I got to her house, and there was a policeman and a neighbor waiting to tell me where to go, and I got to the hospital, and I'm running through the halls, and a nurse grabbed me and said, who are you looking for? And I told him, and she turned me over to this other woman, and she said, would you please take this woman to the quiet room? And I knew the minute that she said the quiet room, I knew that Katrina hadn't made it. And I walked into this room, and her parents just grabbed me, and tears were streaming down their face, and they were crying, and they were saying, why, Margaret? Why would God punish us like this? Why would God take our little girl? What did we do? Why would God do this to us? And they wanted me to go into the room, and Katrina had got her head caught between her mattress and her headboard, and she had suffocated. But she had hit her head, and she'd had some trauma to her face, and we went in there, and I did not want to be there. Didn't want to be there. There's this little baby laying on this gurney, and she had some blood on her face, and they hadn't closed her eyes yet. And I was laying there looking at this little baby with these little dead eyes, and I didn't want to be there, and I wanted to leave, and I wanted to scream. I just wanted to scream, and I wanted to run out of there and just get away from it. And I stood there and I asked, why? Why, God? And I believe it's because I truly took that third step. And when I turned my will and my life over to the care of God, I gave me to Him. And what I know is that maybe why me was because I could be there. Because I have enough of this program and I have enough of God that goes with me. And you people have taught me enough that I don't drink and I don't take anything no matter what. And I can share my experience, strength, and hope with anybody. And that's about being in service today. And it's not just about being in service in these rooms, and that's the principle behind the 12 step. It's not just about be service to alcoholics. It's service in my life. It's service out there. It's being able to be an example. I may be the only big book somebody will ever see. Everybody in my life knows that I'm clean and sober and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everybody knows. I don't have a problem with people knowing who I am, and I understand that some people need to keep their anonymity. I don't. You know, I am who I am. And you people taught me that no matter what, I just don't drink and I don't take anything. And I got to tell that family, you know what, I don't believe that God takes life. I believe God receives life. And I believe that somebody probably came down there and helped Katrina to make that transition. And I believe that she didn't go alone. You know, and I believe that God walks us through whatever life has to give us. And it isn't always pretty, and it isn't always nice, and I don't always like being here, and I get scared, and I get confused, and I get tired, and I don't understand sometimes why things are going on, and I struggle. I struggle with friendships and with people in my life, and when I have 4 jobs, and when I work, I know what the rules are. I know what's expected of me. I know how to do my job. I know when I travel, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know how to do it. And I know that I can live up to the expectations of the people around me, but sometimes in my personal life, I don't know what the rules are. When I'm in a friendship with you and I'm doing the best that I can and you tell me you don't like my behavior, and if I don't tap dance, you're not going to be my friend. I don't know what to do. And I struggle a lot. I'm coming up on 13 years of sobriety in April, and sometimes I feel so lost. I just feel lost sometimes. But I don't drink and I don't take anything, and I know that I have a place to come, and I know that I can stand in front of you people and tell you I'm scared, I'm confused, I'm lonely, and I'm human. I'm having a very human day today. But I'm not drinking and I'm not taking anything. And you people have taught me that. I've learned everything that I've learned from you people. Drugs and alcohol took away my self-respect and it replaced it with self-loathing. It took away my love and it replaced it with hatred. It took away my faith and it replaced it with despair. It took away my serenity and it replaced it with insanity. Drugs and alcohol took away my dignity and it replaced it with incomprehensible demoralization. And as the result of not drinking and not taking anything and going to meetings and picking up a big book and getting a sponsor and working the steps with that sponsor, I stand before you today, a woman who respects herself. When I look in the mirror, I love the woman who's looking back at me today. I have love in my life today. I have more love in my life than I have ever dreamed possible. I have faith today. I know that God is always walking with me, and there are times that I feel so surrounded by God's love and so wrapped within the light, and I know that there isn't anything that God and I in this fellowship can handle. I have serenity in my life. Most of the time when I pray, I know that I will have serenity amidst chaos if I bring God into my life. I have a freedom today, and it's the freedom from the bondage of self that it talks about in the third step prayer. It comes as a gift of these steps. I have dignity today. I am no longer ashamed of who I am or where I came from, because you people taught me that I don't have to be ashamed. I'm not a bad person trying to be good. I'm a sick person who's trying to get well. And as the result, I stand in front of you today, a clean and sober, beautiful, intelligent woman who within the boundaries of this program is growing up to be the child that God had always intended me to be. And if you don't believe in miracles, look in the mirror and you'll see one. And if you get scared and confused and lonely, it's okay, you're in the right place. Just don't drink and don't take anything and just keep coming back, because I love you. Thanks for letting me share.